Program around conversation around politically engaged poetry. Thrilled to have you all here. It's a very special evening for us. Thrilled to have Capital Maine with us as well. We'll get into the program in just a minute, but I did want to say a few words about Beyond Baroque before we get started, for those of you who don't know too much about us. We are Los Angeles' oldest literary institution, founded 55 years ago. Thank you. Older than I am. But we exist to support writers, to nurture new writing, to build literary community. And we do that in a variety of ways. We have a reading and performance series right here in this theater. Several events pretty much every weekend. Poetry readings, conversations, talks, multimedia performances, music, all kinds of things. We have a workshops program. We have our free Wednesday night workshop, poetry workshop, which has been running continuously since 1969. A huge swath of LA's better known poets have gone through that workshop. We have a Monday night fiction workshop as well that's also free. We have a variety of individual master classes that we host, on a Saturday, or sometimes they're multi-week. And we have an art gallery as well, the Mike Kelly Gallery. I would encourage you to check out our current exhibit. It's called Where Has All the Affordable Housing Gone? And it is a project directed by Judy Brantman, who I believe is here tonight. Judy, where are you? Yeah. And this project has really been going on for a couple of years at this point that we started. It's convened several workshops to have community members research the loss of affordable housing in Venice, principally through illegal evictions under the Ellis Act, also by other means. And it explores really the homelessness crisis that exists around us through landlords in complicity with the city, evicting tenants from affordable housing and converting those houses into much more expensive units. So really check out the exhibit. Judy's here, as I said, and if you find her, she can tell you all about it. It's a great project. As I mentioned, we are turning 55 this year, and so I do want to call your attention to the fact we are having our 55th anniversary gala next Saturday, a week from this Saturday, October 21st. So if anybody is interested in supporting us, coming to a party, having a good time, I'd encourage you to check that out. We'll be honoring the generations of poets and writers and artists who have helped build this space, including one of our guests tonight, Lynn Thompson, the Poet Laureate of Los Angeles, who's here with us. But also Ed Ruche, the artist, who's a major supporter of ours, Amanda Gorman, who's another major supporter, our founding artistic director, Jim Crusoe, our former artist in residence, Bob Branneman, Xochitl Julissa Bermejo, who's the founder of a literary nonprofit in LA, as well as Hiram Sims, who's the founder of the Sims Library of Poetry. And so I think that's going to be, and Amy Gersley as well, who's one of the most prominent poets associated with this. It's going to be a really great party, so please do check that out. Give you a sense of the literary history in Los Angeles as well.
Does it happen?
October 21st.
Where?
Good question. Playa Studios in Culver City. We had a gala here one year, and I said never again. That's too much work. So we're having another venue. But yeah, it's nearby in Culver City. It's a beautiful space. More immediately, we have a reading of new and commissioned work this Saturday. It is featuring Christopher Soda, Miriam Gerba, and Danny Snelson. We commissioned these writers to create this work, so it'll be the first time it's ever been presented anywhere. Please do come back for that.
What time?
7 o'clock on Saturday. I love it. People, yeah. Come. I think we'll also think before we start this program, it's worth acknowledging our presence here on Tongva land. We, as an arts organization, feel it's very important to acknowledge the wrongs done to Indigenous people in this country and on this land, and recognize that settler colonialism and genocidal practices have been a great crime against those peoples, but it's also important to recognize the presence of those peoples in this community and their continued vitality through their art and their poetry and their sense of community as well. Finally, just a big word of thanks to our staff also. Yvonne Salinas, who did a lot of work putting this program together, Eric Alberg, and Leon as well in the booth, Genesis Perez in the bookstore, our assistant director, Jimmy Vega, our board president, Shonda, who's also with us tonight. But above all, I want to thank Capital in Maine, and particularly Jessica Goodhart, who organized this program. Jessica came to me several months ago and said, I really want to do a series on sort of commissioning prominent poets to reflect on poetry that engages with political topics. And I just thought it was a great idea. We put it together. Jessica commissioned some number of great essays. And it's just been a thrill to work with Capital in Maine. For those of you who don't know, Capital in Maine is an absolute beacon in the media landscape as the media continues to sort of fall apart around us. They do really amazing work. And so I would love if you all support Beyond Baroque, but please also support Capital in Maine. They do very, very, very important work. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to our moderator, who is Jessica. Jessica Goodhart is a poet and senior reporter at Capital in Maine, a Los Angeles-based publication covering inequality and climate change. She's also a poet, and I believe she's been coming here for a number of years under those auspices. She does have a poetry book, Earthquake Season, which was published by WordPress and is actually available in the bookstore, as are the rest of the books of our authors. So if you like what you hear, please do pick up their books. It'll support them as well. Thank you so much for letting me ramble on, and thank you all for coming. I'm going to turn it over to Jessica, and we'll get going from there.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Quentin. It's such a thrill to be here at Beyond Baroque. As Quentin mentioned, I got my start writing poetry here. I won't say how long ago, but it was it was a little while. So it's really wonderful to be back and sharing the stage with these incredible poets. Welcome. Thank you for those of you who braved traffic, and those of you who live nearby as well. This is Poets on the Beat, a conversation on politically engaged poetry. I will explain what that means in a minute. Before we begin, I want to do some thank yous to Beyond Baroque. As Quentin mentioned, I came to him a number of months ago with this idea, and he was just so excited about it and really helped. Helped us put it together and select these amazing poets. I want to thank Quentin and Yvonne Salinas, Michelle Raphael, Genesis, who's working in the bookstore, Jimmy Vega, and Michelle. I can't remember who all I mentioned, but the entire team. It's been such a pleasure collaborating with you on this project. And also, a special thanks to Capital in Maine, our multimedia director, Marco Amador, Danny Feingold, our publisher, Peter Hong, our editor-in-chief, and Pandora Young, and Luis Gomez. They have supported this project, and it would not be what it is without them. And I also want to acknowledge the writer Erin Aubrey Kaplan, who is our board chair and is in the audience. Some of the fans are here. And Erin Cantu, who covers climate for us. A really amazing reporter, climate, is going to be on the agenda tonight. And Robin Yurovich, who's reporting, is here tonight, whose reporting is very much in tune with the exhibit out there, whose title is Where Has All the Affordable Housing Gone? So please check out her work as well. So just a little bit more about Poets on the Beat. As Quentin said, we invited 6 distinguished poets to write essays on contemporary themes that also engaged with poetry. This is sort of an unusual form. I don't know if it's been done before. And the poets who participated in the project, we actually have pictures of them all, and we're going to flash them on the screen. Wink, wink. It's coming soon. Shonda Buchanan. Wait. Anyway, I'm going to just start saying their names because Shonda Buchanan, who's here, I'll introduce her more fully in a minute. There we go. Seshu Foster, novelist and poet. Lee Herrick, California Poet Laureate. Luis Rodriguez, another former LA Poet Laureate. Lynn Thompson, our amazing LA Poet Laureate. And my teacher and mentor, Suzanne Lemus, right here. So we're joined tonight by three of these poets, and their essays touch on a wide variety of themes: the joys and sorrows of work, climate change, police violence, housing and gentrification, anti-Asian violence, and what it is to live in a place that doesn't always love you back, or to love a place that doesn't always love you back. So what we're going to do tonight is we're going to have a conversation. I'm going to introduce the poets more fully in a minute about the project, do a Q&A, and then we're going to wrap up with a poetry reading, all in a tight hour. I just, before I introduce the poets, we're getting there, the subject for today is politically engaged poetry. I know for many of us, our minds are very much on the situation in Israel and Gaza. It's perhaps, people may disagree, but a little too raw for poetry right now. We haven't really prepared to speak about it, but I did want to acknowledge that these events are very much on our minds and very heavily on our minds. And, one person I have been thinking about in these past few days is a young man named Chaim Katzman, who was a University of Washington graduate. He was killed on last Saturday during the attacks by Hamas. He was a peace activist and a professor of Jewish studies. And he dedicated his dissertation to all life forms that exist between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Sea. And his brother and many of his friends are hoping that they can help that dedication live on in his memory. So without further ado, I want to introduce our panel. They've all published multiple books. Those are listed in your programs. And I will start with Lynn. Oops, she's over here. She's been over here the whole time. Amazing. She is an incredible poet, as well as an incredible ambassador for poetry. Toni Barnstone has written that her poems sing of her Caribbean ancestors who won't be told they can or can't do. U.S. Poet Laureate Natasha Trethewey has written, Thompson is a poet who revels in language, that house of many pleasures. She's won multiple honors and her work has been published widely, and that is true of all the poets on the stage. And I believe Lynn, or we know Lynn, is also a lawyer by training. So watch out. Suzanne Lummis is a poet, performer, and teacher who was born in San Francisco, grew up in the Sierra Nevada mountains. David St. John has written of Suzanne, nobody can ride a metaphor bareback better than this poet, and nobody delivers her work to the page with as much sass and wry humor, which we sure need. She was the editor of a poetry anthology, Wide Awake, Poets of Los Angeles and Beyond, I believe, published by the Pacific Coast Poetry Series. And she's also the author of a politically engaged poetry tract called Tweets from Hell, and you can imagine what that might be about. Shonda Buchanan is a Kalamazoo, Michigan native. She's a poet, essayist, educator, and memoirist whose memoir, Black Indian, explores being African-American with American Indian roots and the consequences of that dual inheritance. And the writer, Tyamba Jess, has said, Shonda is besieged and besotted with the gift of dream vision. The poet Ron Smith praises her sensual and archetypal poems that stretch the marvelous mind. And I just recommend that you read all of these poets soon. Okay, we're going in. So we're going to start with you, Lynn. Okay. Your essay, and by the way, there's a QR code on the back of your program that'll take you right to the Poets on the Beat website. Don't go there now, because then you'll be on your phone. But your essay is called Inspiration from Anguish, Student Poets Respond to a Hotter and Diminished Planet. So you were tasked with writing about climate, and you started with student poets. Why did you want to do that?
Well, coincidentally, about the time I was invited to do this, I was invited to Cal State Channel Islands by the poet Marcia de la O to speak with her class who was coincidentally writing eco-poetics and poems about nature and so forth. And I've long thought, I apologize to the young ones in my family. I said, I know we have screwed this up for you. I am so sorry. But I do believe that it's the students, the activist students, who are really tangling with an issue that they're going to have to live with. I'm going to be resting in my ashes at Forest Lawn, as far as I know. And they're the ones who are going to have to try to figure out what to do with this melting planet that we've left them. So I was really interested in their thoughts and where they see this going and how they were wrapping that issue into their poetry. So that was really the impetus for going there.
And do you want to read one of the student poems?
Yes, if you read the article itself has an excerpt, but I wanted to bring, let's see if I can do this multi-handed situation. Okay, let me read one of them. This young lady, Melissa Mendez Conchas, I hope I'm pronouncing her name correctly, and this really struck me. I was there. I was there when oceans were rich in water and life, and trees were so sturdy and tall, but I was also there when oceans begged for a cup of water and buckles of trees weakened to death. I was there, and thus my biggest mistake. For when the sun came accusing me of murder and telling me I must have the same faith as them, it sentenced me to his furious gaze for the rest of my days. For I was there and did nothing but observe how nature took one last breath and left the earth. This is a young 18-year-old girl, and I just was so moved by the guilt she was already expressing in her poem about what humans are doing or failing to do to protect this one planet that we have. So thank you for asking me to read that.
Yeah. Now, in the piece, you also include poems by their elders.
Correct.
And what are they doing differently than the students, or did you notice similarities?
Well, and I say this to students all the time, and it was said to me by no less than Robert Haas, former U.S. Poet Laureate. The only difference between any of us who consider ourselves experienced poets and a young poet is that we may have a few tools they have yet to learn, but we all sit down with a blank sheet of paper, and if you are lucky enough and unfortunate enough to be the poet laureate, people expect you to just whip it out. People tell me all the time, can you just whip me out something? There's no whipping. There's no whipping involved. It takes a little bit more than that. But yes, the elder poets, their forebears on the page, have learned some tools in their poetry, but I have to say that the frankness and the honesty and the innocence of Melissa's Melissa's poem is pretty compelling and perhaps not as polished. And all of us on this stage probably, well, I would have done this or I would have done that. But I'm really happy with her poem, and I think it stands next to the more polished, award-winning, better-known poets. So, yeah, I love that the students want to tackle this and are so forthright and compassionate in their view, and it shows on the page.
And then the other thing that transpired while Lynn was working on this is that there was a really interesting court case where young people were also taking center stage, and you referenced that in your piece. Do you want to talk about that for a minute?
I do want to talk about that. In the organization, I said, somebody's going to ask me about this, and it's called, well, I can't read my own handwriting. Our Children's Trust, which is an organization that literally represents in court young people 5 to 22 years old. And they brought a case in the state of Michigan, which has in its constitution, I promise I won't go on and on like a lawyer and blather on, but has a statement in its constitution that the citizens of the state are constitutionally entitled to a clean and safe environment. And so the students said, let's bring a lawsuit and make them live up to this. And of course, they had a lot of reasons and arguments on the other side why they couldn't do that. But ultimately, the students prevailed. And it's just so encouraging with the help of this organization that is specifically there to represent them. So it's the kind of thing that I want to share with students who are writing poets and say, okay, take this court case and think about what they've done and see how you want to convey that in language as a poet or a prose writer for that matter. But I just was so impressed with this case that said to the state, okay, you've made us these promises, now you need to live up to them. And they were particularly focused on emissions in Montana. This was in Montana. Yeah.
It was Montana,
yeah,
not
exactly.
Michigan, right?
Not Michigan,
That's
no,
right.
Montana.
One of those
M states.
I would have been so happy since I'm from Michigan.
I know. I'm so shocked. Shonda, they're probably doing it there too.
I was like, let me check that out.
There are 13 states, I think, that have this specific statement in their constitutions. California is not one of them, interestingly. But there are 13 states that has it. So it'll be interesting to see. Of course, it's going to be appealed to the Supreme Court. Don't get me started. But at the lower court level, they did prevail.
All right, thank you, Lynn. Okay,
Thank you.
so we're going to stay with the theme of climate for a moment and move to Suzanne. Suzanne, you were tasked with writing about
fire.
Here we have it.
Oh, there it is, the fire. Oh my God.
Can you talk about, that was pretty much all I told you. I
It's
said,
just fire.
fire, go.
All right. So I was happy that you gave me an assignment, a word, actually just gave me a word and to run with it. And you suggested also, I thought it was a good idea, wait till fire season. Then I will have a lot to talk about because something will happen during fire season. So I waited. And then what did you do, Jessica?
I did not set
this is
any
your
of
fault.
those fires.
You set the world on fire. She gave me the topic of fire, and then the whole freaking world went up in flames. About 5 weeks after I got that assignment. And I'm talking about the boreal forests of Canada. And this was new. I mean, we've had a lot of conflagrations and destruction and fires that are worse than they've ever been before because of climate change. But we never had a situation before that I remember where millions of acres of the boreal forests of Canada caught on fire, and the smoke rolled down into I think in the article I call it our arguably United States, couple dozen of them at least, and smoked people out, smoked out our poet friend C.C. Perry over there. It was visiting Brooklyn in New York. And it was another insight into the effect of fire and smoke, because we've always thought if we could avoid the fire, we would at least be okay. Our homes would be okay. Our homes are still standing, and the fire finally got put out. And now we know different. We know that even if the fires get put out, this is something I just learned thanks to you, Jessica, and the research I did, that smoke invades massive territories and across the states, that a lot of the air pollution actually comes from fire from other states. And this has health effects on people that creep up on them, to the point where when there are fires going on, the emergency rooms have all these extra people to handle because they're coming in with cardiac problems and breathing problems. So are you going to ask me about my challenge, by the way?
Well, I want, yes, I mean, why don't you say let's say that what this essay is about, because you're talking kind of about your challenge, but you
haven't gotten to the challenge yet. I'm going to get there.
I'm going to read the headline, which is Is climate change transforming literature and poetry? Southern California writers have long used distant blazes to create atmosphere. Worsening fires have changed all that, is the headline that we ended with. And so kind of that's sort of what was your angle, and you want to talk
So
about
this is what makes it different. And I'll kind of take on the challenge as a sort of the idea of it as a twofold thing. One, this was not simply write about climate change and fire because we can Google that and the foremost preeminent climate scientists in the country have written about it. So the question becomes, what the hell am I writing about this? What do I have to add to this? I'm not a climate scientist. And of course, it is to fold in literature and poetry. And it ended up with my idea that there are certain great passages of literature and some poems that we might never read quite the same way again, that they might not land on us quite the same way again, because now we have a different and much more ominous understanding of those words, which happens with all literature. There's certain literature that we read from 150 years ago that lands on us differently now because we have a different knowledge. But the other part of the challenge that was interesting to me, although a little daunting, how do I write about this area that is so damn depressing without just depressing the bejesus out of everybody? Because has this happened to anybody else out there where you start reading about the effects of climate change and what is going on with endangered species going obsolete and the sea heating and everything dying, and you just get so depressed. You just want to go make yourself a snack and sit down in front of a 1-hour TV drama or something and escape into escapism. How can I do this without depressing people? And part of the answer was voice. When you read this, the voice is a little bit darkly comic in places and almost a little bit flip. My idea is what we have to do. I think what we have to do is endure, emotionally and psychically endure, as well as be active and recycle. And what else is it? Recycle, compress, reuse, compress, recycle. And what was it? What was the other one? All those good things.
Yeah, all the good things.
You want me to read anything?
Why don't you finish just by reading that passage? So Suzanne quotes a poem that had fire as a central motif, and then a passage from Joan Didion's Play It As It Lays, and says that, never again can we see fire in the same way. Do you want to?
Some people might see fire in the same way, but I might not.
Interestingly, we contacted the author of this poem, and she herself had to evacuate her home, living in Santa Barbara. And she read the essay, and she was very. She felt like you'd gotten it on the nose. But why did you want to read?
All right. So Joan Didion is somebody who certainly influenced. When a writer is really powerful, and certainly Joan Didion is one of the great signature writers from. Well, not from California, she's from Sacramento, but lived a long time in LA. When they're really effective, they almost teach you how to see your own region. And so this was a passage from Play It As It Lays, where the character Mariah, who was having a lot of psychic, emotional, and mental challenges, it tells herself why she wants to sleep outside by the pool. She is a actor of the very fringe, very low budget experimental movies. The beach towels had a special point. because she had an uneasy sense that sleeping outside on a rattan chaise could be construed as the first step towards something unnameable. She did not know what it was she feared, but it had something to do with empty sardine cans in the sink, vermouth bottles in wastebaskets, slovenliness past the point of no return. She told herself she was sleeping outside just until the heat broke, just until the fires stopped burning in the mountains. So the essay talks about how we might now see those fires burning in the mountains differently and feel them differently than we did when I first read that famous passage.
Thank you, Suzanne. That's beautiful. Okay, Shonda. Okay, we're going to move away from climate. Yeah, we're tackling serious topics tonight because I knew Shonda was working on a book on the Black Lives Matter movement, on responses to the murder of George Floyd in 2020. And so I wanted her to tackle that topic in an essay, which was a little bit different than what you had been doing. And, but one that linked to poetry. And so, Shonda, I just wanted to ask you kind of, what was that like, that process of moving from poetry to prose on this, or what kind of, however you want to sort of talk about it, and then I think you were wanting to read a little bit of.
Right. Yeah. No. And I think I might have to pull your. Yeah. Thank you so much. It's interesting. So you're asking the question, how was it to move from poetry to prose? In this particular instance, with these poems, it was gratifying to be able to talk about the poetry, but then also connect the history of the experience of the Black neck, is what I call it, in America. So I had already been thinking about the essays that I'd written for the LA Weekly and the Black experience in Los Angeles. And I think my first article actually was after the Rodney King riots, my first really little article in the LA Weekly. And then I started thinking about what, should I compile all of this? But then I was writing poetry at the same time. So when you came with this, I said, oh, this is the perfect essay, the perfect time to be able to translate the poetic elements that I have been working with. And actually, it took me so long to write the poem for George Floyd. I just couldn't. And there are a lot of artists who have moments where something is too tender and too hot to touch, poetically. You can't even wrap your mind and your language around it, right? And it took me a long time to be able to write that poem, the poem that I wrote for this one. And when it came, it just flowed out. It just flowed out. And I realized that since George Floyd's murder, I had been writing poems, different kinds of poems. There was a poem that I wrote for the young man who's the young wrestler Andrew Johnson, whose locks were cut on he was wrestling, and his coach said, if you don't cut your locks, then you cannot wrestle. And so he had his locks cut, and I wrote that poem for him. And I was with a group of sisters, and we were kind of working on different kinds of poetry. So I wrote this poem called Black Woman Down. And that poem came from the murder of Nia Wilson and her sister in San Francisco. So I had been gradually, as the poet, trying to language this kind of pain and, what it meant to have this continual terrorism upon us. And at moments when we're sleeping, right, or Breonna Taylor, or moments when we're shopping, or moments when we're driving a car, or moments when we're taking care of our children, or knocking on a door, or so there's continual moments. And for me to be able to write this essay allowed me to connect Richard Wright's poem, which Richard Wright's poem was published first in a 1968 collection called I Am the Darker Brother. And it was compiled by a librarian in Chicago.
And what's the name of that poem?
The name of the poem is Between the World and Me. And I have the poem. The poem is also in the essay as well. And the poem talks about a lynching. And we say here that presumably the speaker is Black because the poem is someone happens upon a scene of lynching, but then they imagine the lynching and then suddenly they become the one who's lynched. And so I read this when I was 11. Can you imagine an 11-year-old kid reading a poem like that? And I really honestly hadn't had that experience. I didn't know what it meant. My mother, we come from a family where we talk about our triraciality and our biraciality. So there were a lot of things, that I didn't get with regards to the civil rights movement. We did listen to Martin Luther King albums, though, I have to say, in our homes, like, every King Day. But those kinds of things I kind of had to discover on my own. And then it became the sense of, if Richard can write this poem and has written this poem, and then if James Baldwin is talking about the same kinds of semiotic relationship of African Americans and white people in America, and there's still no fix, there's no answer, there's no resolution to it. And then here comes 2020, and that's not just 2020, there's so many different moments when it happens. So to be able to connect that Richard Wright poem to this other poem by Mike, Not an Elegy for Mike Brown, and then my poem was really gratifying, I think. And so the collection of poetry that I'm working on is called America's Blood Flowers. But in the process of thinking about my work, the other collection of essays that I'm going to be working on is, should I tell you the title? No one steal this title. Okay, don't steal my title.
But the lawyer will say that titles are not copyrighted.
Titles are not copywritten. Oh, I shoot. Okay, darn it. But so I want to. So I'm going to write a collection of essays called "The White Cultural Imagination and the Black Neck," because I've been writing work that essays for the LA Weekly that kind of deals with that relationship. And the other thing that I write about in the essay is, I want it not to be an experience that only Black people care about. You know what I mean? Because there's a sense of the allies, right? The alliedship that we're supposed to have. And when just before the lockdown, I started telling my friends, my white friends, they would, of course, when something happens, and they say, "How do you feel about that?" And I'm like, how do you feel about that? And then I got even a little bolder and I said, are you talking to your family members about that, about racism or about this moment? Do you talk to them in the locker room or in the grocery store? So I'm really vocal about the responsibility of us all to carry the weight of social justice and to discuss and explore what that means for us, for our children, right? It's all about responsibility. So I'm in Trader Joe's, and if you hear me talking about an essay or a moment that happened, I have I'm not whispering. I'm just like, hey, and then I might ask the clerk, what do you think about this? It's a conversation we all have to have. We all have to have if we want to, I won't say it can ever be eradicated, but if we want to create a different climate around that kind of injustice for Black people and people of color, for BIPOC people as well.
Thank you, Shonda. And we're gonna, so her essay, as she mentioned, looks at sort of poetry about basically black death, black sort of really dark parts of the Black experience historically. So you go back to Richard Wright, you mentioned Phyllis Wheatley, mentioned contemporary who's an enslaved woman who was a writer, and then she connects it to some contemporary writers who've written in response to the Black Lives Matter, sort of some of the deaths that have happened. So I recommend her essay and also the poetry, and we're going to hear one of her amazing poems a little bit later. So, this gives you an idea of the project, but we wanted to have this to be more of a conversation. So I want to open it up to the audience to see if there are questions. But I'm going to start with just a question, just to throw out a question, just to get just more of a conversation started about sort of the role of poetry. And I think Hilda Weiss and Wayne Lindbergh are here. They did a Poetry LA video on this project, which I recommend to you. And I'm going to ask a kind of a version of the question that Hilda asked me in that interview. And that question was, what do poets or have to say, or what does poetry have to say that journalism or the news can't tell us? It was William Carlos Williams who said, "Well, it's difficult to get the news from poems, but men die miserably every day for lack of what is found there." Right? So I mean that's one answer. But
can I answer that with a portion of this first part of it? Yeah. So this is what my journalism teacher said to me. You can't be a journalist. You write too flowery. You always incorporate an image. And I said to him, why can't I incorporate an image in a factual story? And so this is what poetry does for me, and this is a poetic element of it. A bitterness rose up inside me, a 400-year history of dispossession, Black bodies being transported out of Africa, Black bodies in chain gangs in the Deep South, Black bodies being forced out of whites-only swimming pools before they were filled with concrete. I swallowed it. All night, I heard my South Central LA neighbors simmering with disbelief, horror, anguish, emotions all too familiar. And just that paragraph illustrates what journalism won't let us do, which is to talk about the emotion or to show the emotion. There's an insinuation that pain has happened. So there's almost a passive regard for some journalism, not all journalism, I have to say. Aaron, you know this, I know. But there are moments where it's like, just tell us the facts, tell us the pyramid, tell us the upside down pyramid, but you can't get emotional. And for poetry, emotion is a lesson, right? It's a strength, and so that's what I feel. Yeah, thanks for reading that.
I was gonna follow up when you said that. As I said earlier, I'm a recovering attorney, and when I was practicing, I submitted a brief, and the judge said, "Ms.
Thompson, this brief is just so gorgeous. It's wrong, and I'm denying your motion, but the language is so lovely," right? I should have known then. I should have run for the hills. But I think, it's interesting. Poetry doesn't tell us what to think, but it tells us to think. And it does it with images, and sometimes I like to use a lot of wordplay in my poetry, but ultimately it's not supposed to instruct you necessarily, and yet you might feel instructed to go beyond the lines of the poetry, because the poetry is trying to capture a moment or moments or a history even. But at the end of the day, it's leading you, hopefully, toward your own light of things you might not have thought of, except for the way that they were presented. And if they were presented well, you remember them all your life. We remember some of Shakespeare because it was just the right thing he was saying about Richard III. We know those people, right? So yeah, I always think of it as something that hopefully will make someone want to take the next step.
Oh my God! You mentioned. Thank you for that lead-in. You said it's just your great intuition that you just said the perfect thing in the perfect moment, because you mentioned old man Shakespeare, and when I read the news about what's going on in the Middle East, a line keeps coming back to me. It was written around 1601, give or take a year. It might have been 1602. And that was Shakespeare saying, hell is empty and all the devils are here. And here we are, hundreds of yeah, no freaking kidding. Hasn't gone out of style. And Pound said, poetry is news that stays news. And you just quoted William Carlos Williams saying, it's difficult to get the news from poetry, and yet men die miserably every day for lack of what is to be found there. Now, he probably wrote that in the 40s, I think. And here we are still saying that line. Even though the whole world has changed, we're almost in a different planet than we were in the 40s. And yet that line is still news that stays news. It never goes out of style. So that's what poetry does that's different from the front page of the LA Times, which if you pick it up, in LA Times, I have some that go back 10 years and I pick them up and I go, well, this isn't very relevant anymore. But I have to say something on the counter side regarding journalism. When I read usually the LA Times or the New York Times, they borrow a lot from poets. Oh my God, they are stealing from poets and not giving us credit, because you look at how many articles begin with the image, begin with details, begin with specifics. I think a lot of journalists are taught to do that because they know that the general and the abstract does not interest people. Just to say 1,500 people got killed in Israel is a flat. It's just a statistic, but they'll usually open with an image or a portrayal of somebody cradling their dead son, or somebody looking desperately for their wife. And so therefore, I think that poets don't necessarily imitate journalism, but many journalists learn something from poets. My idea.
Okay, thank you. Oh, I have my mic.
Oh, you've got your own there.
Well, I want to make sure that folks in the audience have an opportunity to ask the panel questions. Before we move, remember to a poetry reading. We have a few minutes for questions. Okay, I can't see anybody. Okay, I see someone over there. Okay, but I pointed to this person. There's sort of a shadowed person right there. The second row, right on the aisle. Okay. Yeah. Can we have some lights on the audience, maybe? Okay. Do you want to go ahead?
Yeah.
Antonia, yeah.
Okay, Antonieta.
Antonia.
Okay, Celaya, the poet, said, poetry is a weapon charged with future. And these times of opprobio, how can we make sure that is,
How can we make sure that poetry
is a weapon charged with future?
So you're saying poetry is a weapon charged with the future. Is that what you're saying? How do we, and what does that mean?
Make sure that
what does that mean to you?
That's in a poem by Celaya,
Yeah.
the Spanish poet. And how can we as poets make sure that is?
So I think what I'm hearing is what I hear and so this is always the thing about poetry, because then you have to think, well, what does that mean? It can mean many things, and that's what's so intriguing about it. A weapon charged with the future seems like, to me, it's something that's sort of saying that poetry, I have to think about that a lot, actually, that poetry is something that
sees the future and takes you to the future. I don't know. I have to spend some time thinking
It's hard to here these days in our part of the world, we tend to portray the future as very dystopian. Every time you see a science fiction movie or speculative fiction or something, it's the future is always terrible and ruled by tyrants or some awful things. So it maybe, could it mean change the future or shape the future or
Speak the future.
what?
Maybe write it.
Write the future. Write or shape the future. Yeah.
Okay, I think Shonda wants to respond.
I also, just to answer, I think about poetry as a weapon. Is that poetry as a weapon? So
Charged
with the future. So I do think that poetry is a weapon for me, and it's a tool, it's a weapon, but it's also medicine for me. So when I think about it as a weapon, I think of all the disempowerment that has happened for communities of color and for in terms of gender and language, the ability to create language or to create a poem or to write something that impacts other people, like flowers landing in a crowd, right? And so for me, that's a weapon, because what am I putting into other people? We always say, or I say when I'm reading, thank you for listening to me, for allowing me to speak into your space, because it impacts us, right? And poetry, for me, that's what it is. This is my weapon, but it's also the balm. Alice Walker says that, right? She says it's something along the lines of even though there is a poison, there's always an antidote. Like there's an antidote within the poison. And for me, of course, when I think about that, I'm thinking about, I know how to wield it in a way that it can change something, it can regenerate something, hopefully it can heal. So that's what that quote means to me.
And as I'm listening to my fellow poets, for me the answer is ask a different poet, you'll get a different answer.
Excuse me?
I'm sorry.
Poetry hasn't always been used as a weapon for good. For instance, the Vanderbilt agrarian poets, with their Diluvian revival of the anti-urban, which they thought was a black dystopian. Modern poetry itself is full of anti-Semites, I need not mention names, and poetry as a weapon has not always been wielded for good. It is a very good political propaganda tool in nationalism. Again, I don't have need to mention other examples, but we all know that. And I think we're fooling ourselves if poetry is always used for happiness.
Is there a question? Because it sounds like you're on the verge of a question.
That poetry is not always a happy tea party.
Okay, thank you so much. I just want to make sure that folks who have questions for the panel.
Okay, right, but we can usually fall into that, like the Vanderbilt fugitives did.
Yeah. No, I think it is a good point. I don't think poetry or any kind of writing is any one thing, right?
I don't think people are saying that.
Yeah. Okay. In front in the yellow, I think you're wearing yellow.
Yeah. I was just wondering how you take care of your mental health while researching and writing about such heavy topics.
You're asking me? Yes. I sleep a lot, I was telling Aaron. Since 2020, whenever I am tired, I sleep. For me, I've realized that even in relationships, when there's an argument happening, I get incredibly tired. And then it's like, please stop talking, I can't hear you because I'm tired. So I've realized that's a way that I repair. And then also I do shut down. There are moments when so many things are happening and in the world. I will say the succession of the earthquake in Turkey in Morocco, and the incredible amount of deaths. And then every time you see something, and of course you can swipe now. It's like, oh, I'm not gonna look at that. I'm not gonna look at that. I'm not. But it's like a ghost in for me. It's a ghost in my mind of the trauma, because I am a writer who writes about that, and I dig into it. And so I rest. I disconnect. I live in Playa del Rey. I'm at the beach often. And then if it gets really bad, my daughter is my best friend. So, I'm like, hey, daughter, I need to lay something on you. And so she's like, you got 2 minutes. I have 2 kids. But so I do talk about it. But eventually the writing becomes my medicine. It's like, I got that out. And now I can go about my life. And, because that's here on the page, and then I can read it. And then I know that it's not just me writing something for myself, but it's me writing something to speak for others who couldn't speak for themselves. And that, for me, is a part of the healing relationship, or the repair as well.
I think you I had a question as well. Yes.
Okay, so this is first I wanted to say it's been a wonderful experience listening to you talk about poetry. Because I'm sort of new to poetry and I'm really beginning to explore that. But this is a practical question. Where can we get access to the essays and poems that you're referencing tonight?
Okay, so I can answer that. I can answer that in 2 ways. One is it's at the Capital Maine website, Poets on the Beat. If you Google Poets on the Beat and any one of these poets' names, the essays will come up. There's also a QR code on the back of the program. Thank you. Maybe we'll take one more question.
Yeah, my question is, what's happened is that now the entire LAUSD has got to teach climate change, all subjects, because obviously there's no tech solution. The tech solutions are on the shelf because of culture and history. So what I would love is for poets to somehow, create, those things that we have to teach about poetry and climate, so that we can, give some teachers some lessons that might actually arrive in the classroom.
Are you able to work with, I don't know if they have librarians in schools anymore, but if they don't, your neighborhood library branches in LA are spectacular. I can talk about this from personal experience, and I think all of us can. And they can be very helpful in making those connections for you with poets who can either suggest some materials for your students, or even some of them would visit the classroom. So I would say that's one way to bring those 2 things together that you might want to explore.
Okay, I think we're going to move into the poetry reading segment of this hour. I think, let's see, how are we doing on time? Okay. Yeah, why don't you go ahead? And you can say a little bit why this poem was included in the essay.
Okay, so I focused on students, as I said from the beginning, but Jessica insisted that haven't you written anything that you think can contribute to the conversation? And with that question, and some of you have raised this, what ideas do you use or whatever, I'm always very influenced by journalism and articles that I read and conversations that I overheard. And there was an article in the Montana Standard in 2016 that talked about these snow geese that migrated, and they would come through Montana as part of their journey for the last however many 100 years. But they were starting to land in toxic pits in the state, impeding their ability to fly off. snow geese in Butte. If you find a living snow goose, contact. In the treasure state, snow geese are no longer flying. Gone quiet, their honks, their high-pitched quacks, lost over the toxic Berkeley pit waters. The fallback of oil jerks? There are reasons they are dying, and we're not quite ready to release the hard numbers, whether they exceed the 300 found dead, 1995, but we know that when they landed, 10,000 were alive. One report, the lake was white with birds, a slumber. We are working to keep additional birds from landing, said an EPA ad man, admitting to thousands already dead, but not saying the pit's full of sulfuric acid, heavy metals, not denying that oil crews ignored bird hazing protocols. But hear the brood wail of snow geese seeking a gosling, the hard day and night audible mourning for upswing. So I just felt badly about those little geese. And I don't know, is there time for me to read one of the students' poems? Or I have one more poem? Okay, and this is one of the other students that, there's an excerpt from this poem in my essay, but I wanted to read Andrea's full poem. Andrea Villagomez, this is untitled. I speak for the innocent turtles with their heads stuck in plastic rings. I speak for the helpless, innocent dogs with big hearts who are kicked for no reason. I speak for the voiceless, the bees who participate in the pollination of flowers. I speak for the captured, the wild animals who are confined in a zoo when they should be free in the wild. I speak for all of nature as humankind should have before the world fell into shambles. Thank you.
Okay, how's my microphone working for me today? Can hear me? Yeah. Okay, so this requires a little bit of setup. A persona poem, of course, is a poem where the speaker, the I, is not the poet. The speaker is a character, like a mask, like a dramatic monologue. And this was written when I very much wanted to write about environment, but climate change had not come to our attention yet. All we knew about was pollution. This is written in the voice of Eurydice. Anybody in the audience want to say, just so you don't have to listen to me talking all the time, anybody want to say who Eurydice was? I will say it if you don't want to. How about you? Do you want to? No. Okay, good. Don't say that you didn't get the opportunity. Don't come complaining to me later. Eurydice was the wife of Orpheus. Orpheus, not a god, but I think a demigod. And Orpheus was the great musician who was so, when he played the lute, whatever it was, the animals gathered around him. His wife died bit by a snake. He loved her so much he went down into Hades, played his lute, and made such an impression on the king of hell, or Hades, that he said to Orpheus, okay, you can have your wife back. She will follow you back. You will go ahead of her. But what you must not do, anybody remember? How about Hilda? Remember what he must not do?
He must not look back.
He must not look back. And we know what happens when there's a fairy tale or a myth, and there's this one thing that you must not do. You can have all the trees and the fruits and the flowers in the garden, but there's this one tree you must not pick from that. We know where this is going, right? Every time. So for this, I found the inspiration from a Los Angeles Times. So I do have to I take back what I said over there when I said that we're not influenced by journalists and the news. I guess I am. So in the LA Times, it said, meanwhile, work boats from 2 private companies arrived to gently vacuum dead fish from the rocky floor of King Harbor Marina, where 30 to 40 tons of sardines remain submerged. About 50 tons of hot dog-sized fish have been scooped from the water. This seemed like a bad omen to me. All right, Eurydice finally finds a working phone booth. I've got bad news and worse news. First, I'm in hell. Yeah, you know. And secondly, I'm calling collect. Come get me. Come on, give it one more try. And hurry up, will you? I don't like the weather, muggy most days. And the seaside town that may be served once as an annex to heaven is shot, well, to hell, I guess. The wharf eaten, strewn with threadbare net stalls where fishermen displayed the open-eyed shine of the day's catch. Just rotted sticks now, the storefronts turning to salt, then to thick and itchy air. Wow, what was that? Can you believe all those words jumped from my mouth? I don't know how I did it, but it seems as much poetry leaps up from hell as wafts down from heaven. Anyway, I'm running out of coins, and their metal rubs my thumbs green weird. It's the atmosphere. No fun to breathe, but we get these killer sunsets. The discharge of tailpipes and smokestacks makes them pretty. See? All the junk you guys put out finds its way down here. Our waves exude a bluish iron gleam, and there are no cute fishes left. Just toothy things retrofitted for the fight ahead. Get it? Hell as preview of the future Earth. Don't worry, babe. Roll your fat van down every dirt road and 2- and 4-lane byway. The vibe of cylinders. That's your music now. Just kidding. Get me out of here. And this time Orf will make it, because at this dump, believe me, you will not look back. Oh, but one good thing. No flames here, like the fundamentalists believe. Although, when I wade thigh deep in this infected, oil-glossy tide, it kind of burns.
What an honor it is to read with you both. It's just incredible. Can we give them a round of applause? It's an honor. So the poem that I'm going to read, I usually introduce it and I say, if you don't know at least 1 or 2 of the references in the poem, you have not been paying attention in America for the last 5 years. Return the white breath to its black body. Return the bullet to its gun. Return the gun to its holster. Return the hand to its side. Return the officer to his car. Return the car to its garage. Return. Return. Return the key to its pocket. Return the pants to the floor. Return the scalding coffee to its pot. Return the hot dawn to the night. Return the sound of lovemaking to the room. Return the child's lips to the father's kiss. Return. Return. Return the arrest warrant to the computer. Return the counterfeit $20 bill to its pocket. Return the knee to its straight position. Return the officer's body to the car. Return the car to the garage. Return the gas to the pump. Return the stars to the sky. Return. Return. Return the anger to its pocket. Return the door to its closed position. Return the bell's jingle to silence. Return the chokehold from his neck. Return the big man to his home. Return the taser to its holster. Return. Return. Return the bullets from her door. Return their steps to the sidewalk. Return the SWAT team to the vans. Return the vans to the garage. Return the Skittles to the candy aisle. Return. Return. Return the boy to his room. Return the hoodie to its closet. Return the whip to its belt. Return the scars from her back. Return the hand to its side. Return their ships to the sea. Return. Return. Return their bodies to Africa. Return their bodies to Africa. Return the resources to the land. Return the land to the mothers. Return their tears to their eyes. Return their jewels to their hair. Return the whisks to our hands. Return. Return. Return the moon to its earth helix womb. Return the earth to the cosmos. Return the cosmos to the black hole. Return the white breath to its black body. Return. Return. Thank you.
Thank you everyone for coming. If you enjoyed their readings, you can hear these poems on the Capital of Maine website and a growing list of other poets reading their poetry as well as their essays. Thank you.